Welcome everyone. From my point, my name is Jo. I am a technical manager for Belgium, Luxembourg for Boehringer. And I welcome again Johannes. I don't have to introduce him because he was already nicely introduced yesterday as an expert in parasitology and certainly in the diagnostic part. And I can also welcome Kieran, who will be our presenter today as an expert in parasitology, as a practitioner in Ireland. Kieran will present us for a small half an hour, I think, on the approach of the parasitological problems on farms in his practice, and also a little bit on the most appropriate treatment, how to deal with it. Do I express myself okay? So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, we will touch them. You can also unmute yourselves and start a discussion, that's no point, but perhaps we can leave the discussion for after the presentation to be sure we have an hour until 2:15 Central Eastern Time. So I can pass the word to Kieran. Kieran, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jo. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you for inviting me to speak today. It's, as Johannes said yesterday, it is indeed an honor to be asked to speak at such an excellent event. Let's get this up here. Seems to have jumped forward. So I'd like to talk to you today about sustainable warming on dairy farms that we see in our practice here in Ireland. I suppose it really starts for me back in 2009 when we had a serious problem with parasites, and it changed the way we approached everything and how we attempt to help our farmers with their problems. We use the science as best we can. As Johannes referred to yesterday, nothing is perfect. You know, that every test has its limitations, but the science is changing all the time, and we hope that we can change with it. I thought it was interesting as well, Johannes referred to the change in the acceptable threshold of parasite infestation, and I have certainly seen that in practice over the last 20 plus years. What was acceptable in 2001 as a level of infestation is no longer acceptable today because of the effects it has on productivity. So this is me, Glenn Veterinary. We are an 8-vet practice in Ireland in a place called Tipperary. 70% of the work we do is relating to farm animals, and about 30% of the work we do is companion animals. And that would be typical of a rural Irish veterinary practice. We're in Tipperary town, which, as you see there, is kind of the middle of the south of Ireland, in an area called the Golden Vale. And this is a name given to the area. It relates to the climate, I suppose, and the soil quality. We have pretty decent soil, great soil for growing grass. And grass is, as you probably know, a very important part of what we do in terms of dairy production. We're predominantly a dairy practice. A lot of our farmers who would have been beef farmers or would have been suckler cow farmers have actually made the change over to dairy, particularly in the last decade. And the country as a whole, and us included, are seeing expansion of herd size. So between 2015 and 2020, milk production in Ireland doubled. It increased by 100%. It was actually a phenomenal level of increase. So this is the Glen that is referred to in the name of the practice. It's called the Glen of Aherlow. It's an area of, it's a national park. And as you can see, there are lots of trees, lots of hedgerows. But if you look a little closer, you can see interspersed amongst them typical farms that we would visit. So these are typical small to medium-sized holdings and traditional family farms. The typical farmer we deal with has about 90 cows. This would be smaller probably than the average in a lot of parts of Ireland. Only 3% of my customers would have more than 250 cows. Now, if you were to travel east of me or south of me down at the south coast, you would see a much higher proportion of bigger farms. The land is drier in those areas, and the better laid, kind of more vast areas of pasture are available. And that's all well and good, but in the last few years, they have had trouble with drought, presumably due to global warming. So our average farmer age is about 44. The national average in Ireland is 57. I consider us lucky in that we have our family farm in Ireland has remained viable. So you do have handing down of farms through generations from father to son. So our average age is pretty young by national standards. We are 100% spring calving in this area. So calving takes place from the 1st of February to the 17th of March. The 17th of March is St. Patrick's Day, which along with being our national holiday, is also now a very important landmark for farmers. It's the date by which all dairy farmers want to have their cows calved. And it's also the date where every farmer in the whole island of Ireland wants to have all cattle outside grazing. It marks the end of the winter housing period on a good year. The climate is mild and wet. So as I said, we grow lots of grass and we have the climate to suit that. Our average winter temperature is about 7 degrees Celsius. It tends to be wet. It rarely snows in Ireland. If it snows in Ireland, it's on the evening news. It's a big deal. Our average summer temperature is 19 to 20 degrees Celsius, and it frequently rains. So perfect conditions for growing grass. The winter housing generally runs from mid-November to mid-March. Currently, we're in mid-November now. We're actually having somewhat of a heat wave. It's very, very mild and it's very dry for the time of year. So a lot of cattle are still outside. There is plenty of grass growing for them outside, and many farmers are looking forward to keeping certainly dry stock out well into December at this stage. So what are the strategies that we're familiar with in Ireland? So just to give you a typical kind of traditional, this is the dosing regime that has been handed down from father to son for generations. All young stock are wormed throughout their first grazing season, and we have a certain amount of pasture management, use of aftergrass, things like that. Generally speaking then, 1-year-old cattle after the first winter will be worm and fluke dosed at turnout, and then possibly at least once during the second grazing season. And this is usually depending on productivity or if there is a bit of a cough develops or something like that. But generally speaking, once or maybe not at all in the second grazing season. And then animals of all ages at housing are given a worm and fluke dose. So this is traditionally what we have done for years. Point number 4 there then would apply to the last decade or so. From a personal point of view, 2014 was the first time I saw adult cows getting a cough in the middle of summer. And so in the intervening years, it has become very, very regular for us to see this. So now I would say almost all of our adult dairy cows are treated for lungworm, generally speaking, late May, early June, or when they start coughing. And the challenges we faced in intestinal roundworms, lungworm, liver fluke, and rumen fluke. So I'm just going to take you through my approach to these in our practice. So rumen fluke, I've given this guy a lovely big picture because rumen fluke is probably the reason I'm sitting here talking to you today. This parasite changed the approach, certainly in my practice, and I would guess in a lot of veterinary practices in Ireland forever. Prior to the arrival of rumen fluke, I would guess that the vast majority of farmers would call to their local co-op shop or their local agricultural merchant to buy their parasite treatments. And it generally boiled down to what they saw advertised in the local press or what was on offer of a given day in the shop or what they generally liked the look of. And I would say then as well that a lot of these products were used incorrectly at the wrong time, things like that. So I would describe rumen fluke as a game changer, certainly for me. And it goes back to November 2009. By November 2009, we were at the end of 2 long, wet years. We had 2 very wet summers, 2008 and 2009. And in the autumn of 2009, we were seeing cattle of all ages showing symptoms like coccidiosis. So losing weight, failing to put on weight, and a really nasty scour or diarrhea. These animals were being given everything. They were being treated for coccidiosis. They were getting multiple doses of products like toltrazural. They were also being treated for liver fluke because it looked like liver fluke. So they were getting any amount of albendazole, triclabendazole, nitroxanil, closantil, and nothing was working. So the vet was called, we were called to see these animals, and it was like nothing we had seen before. But I suppose being vets, we applied a bit of science. And I would say from a personal point of view, my level of sample taking and submission of samples to the lab was much less than my younger colleagues. And certainly I've seen that down through the years, my younger colleagues much more keen to get to the bottom of these things. So we started to send samples of the feces to our local regional veterinary laboratory. And we were getting results back. Of course, they were finding no liver fluke because these animals had been dosed so much. They were finding no coccidia, but they were finding rumen fluke. Now, the initial results summary was telling us that this was a normal commensal and it would be seen under normal circumstances, but that it seemed to be in much higher numbers than previous. I also spoke to local butchers, and they were telling me that, yes, we see rumen fluke in the rumens of our carcasses all the time, but they seem to be much more numerous. So we went about looking for a treatment, and we found a source of oxyclozanide, which up to that point had been considered a pretty obsolete flukicide. So we treated these cattle with oxyclozanide, and the results were magic. These animals turned around, they started to thrive. We discovered that, the animals didn't care about the weather. It wasn't the weather is why they were doing so bad. It was because they had an infestation of this parasite. But the results were so good that we had a new problem in that now all the farmers wanted to use oxyclozanide all of the time. So as time went on, we had found ourselves having new discussions with farmers and telling them, let's go back again, let's use the science, let's do a bit of testing here and see, do you need to use this product? Because we're worried about resistance and the lack of alternatives. The second game changer then, as I referred to earlier, in 2014 was lungworm. So up until 2014, I would have considered I hadn't seen lungworm infestation in adult cattle at all. But we suddenly started to see herds of dairy cows coughing quite badly, coughing very badly, in fact, coughing so badly that they couldn't be milked. So the milking the milking clusters were falling off them. Such was the level of heaving when they coughed. And this created a new challenge for us. And from a personal point of view, it changed my understanding of lifelong, what I consider to be lifelong immunity to certain worms. And we found the diagnosis of lungworm tricky. So we were taking fecal samples and not finding any eggs in them, any Dictyocolus eggs. But we found, I suppose, as much as anything, there was a response to treatment. I would say as well at this stage that there was a lot of other testing being done, and this was a nationwide problem, and a lot of blood testing was done. A lot of cows were found with antibodies to IBR and bovine herpes virus 1. So I think a lot of cows were vaccinated at this time for IBR, whether they needed to be or not. We don't have an IBR eradication program in Ireland yet, but so a lot of our cows are being vaccinated, and it would probably go back up to around about this time. But in terms of diagnosis then, we turned to bronchoalveolar lavage. So this was a new test, but again, a bit like the fecal testing with the rumen fluke, we were, I suppose, applying a scientific approach to this. Certainly from a personal point of view, it was a new skill, and I would say similarly for lots of vets. But the great thing about it was it is a definitive. It was a cow side test. You had a result cow side. There was no sending any samples away. You see the larvae in your little syringe afterwards. And this was this had a great impact on farmers. You could show them the lungworm and say, here you go, this is your reason this is the reason for your problem. So here's one of my colleagues performing a bronchoalveolar lavage. This is just a box, it's a small photo, but it just shows a little box containing everything we need for it. And here is the result. So nothing quite like holding up a syringe like that to your farmer as he stands holding his cow, and you say, here you go, this is why your cow is coughing. So the treatment of choice is eprinomectin because there is no milk withdrawal with it. I would hazard a guess that the sales of eprinomectin in Ireland have been very healthy for the past decade, because not only are we treating these cows once in a season now, the year that's just gone, the summer of 2021, a lot of farmers had to treat their cows 3 times. And even still, we have cows coughing, but we're now so close to the dry period, we're just going to wait until they're being dried off and treat them again. And as I said earlier, traditionally at this time of the year, once cows are dried off, they do get treatment for worms and fluke, and the treatment they get, varies depending on the burden, the liver fluke burden that might be there, or rumen fluke for that matter as well. And speaking about liver fluke then, and as I mentioned earlier, going back to Johannes's talk yesterday, and the threshold for infestation, in my preparation for today, I looked back on lab results going back over the last 12, 14 years. And what struck me was the acceptance back in 2008, 2009, 2010 for a kind of a certain level of liver fluke. So it was quite common for us to find, high positive liver fluke samples. And yet when we when we pass this information on to farmers, they kind of, you know, some of them would say, well, you know, it's not really effective. To the naked eye, it didn't appear to bother them too much. That has completely changed now. The farmer's attitude now is that one fluke egg in a sample is one fluke too many. And this would be relayed as well in a more recent development, which involves factory reports. So these are reports, every animal now that's slaughtered in one of our abattoirs, the owner gets a report back, and it's a traffic light system. So green is no fluke, amber is fluke, history of fluke, but no active fluke, and red is active fluke. And you know, it is a historical thing in that the animal is gone and everything is done, but it does give the farmer an idea of where his fluke control is taking him. And I suppose that in itself can be a trigger for a farmer to make sure that everything is good. And also they have been more educated as the years have gone on the effect of liver fluke on productivity and weight gain. So I would say that treatment now for farmers is more targeted based on their lab results, either done by us or done in the labs. And then these abattoir reports fall into that as well. For dairy farmers, I often end up having the conversation, you know, so a farmer will come to me to buy his fluke drench for the year, and, you know, he might be coming without having submitted any samples, or he might have an idea of what he wants. And he may say, for instance, in a year like this where dairy farming has done very, very well, he might decide that he wants to give his cows the best. He wants, what's the best thing you have for fluke treatment? But I will try to have the conversation with the farmer that the best treatment for your cows is the one they need, and not necessarily the one that you want to give them. And I do end up highlighting time well spent. A big, big problem historically with our parasite control down through the years has been the use, it might be the use of the correct product, but at the wrong time. So it might be using albendazole and the cattle are not yet housed or just housed, or, you know, so, you know, yes, you need albendazole, but please don't give it to your cattle until they've been in the shed for 6 weeks. You might need oxyclosinide for ruminant fluke, but please, unless it's an urgency, wait until they're in the shed at least 9 weeks. Or if they're very badly if there's a bad infestation, give it now, but give it another one in 9 weeks' time. So I would always like to highlight with my farmers that the time they spend drenching the cows, it's a big, big job. Make sure it's time well spent. So then in my own practice then, the approach we take is, it revolves around advice, fecal testing, and our winter treatment plan. And I'll go through each one of those individually. So a few years ago, we started doing fecal egg counting in our practice. Now, you know, we're well aware that fecal egg counting has its limitations. There is no doubt about that. But as the vet, and speaking to farmers whose cattle we know quite well, I think we're in a good position to say, well, look, you know, your productivity is good. Maybe your slaughter reports are good, or maybe not. We can look at the bigger picture, and that's where we use fecal egg counts as part of the bigger picture. We're also familiar with the geography of the area. So, you know, if we have a farmer in a particular part of the practice area, we might know that, for instance, his neighbours have had trouble with ruminant fluke or lungworm or liver fluke, and we can apply that as well. One thing Gustavo referred to yesterday was the difference. You know, I know people are listening today from all over the world, and the difference in the parasite burden depending on what part of the world you're from. In Ireland at its widest point is only 250 kilometers wide, yet the difference in burden of something like liver fluke on the west coast versus that on the east coast is vastly, vastly different. And that the climate is also vastly different in the two, partly because we're at the mercy of the Atlantic Ocean. but there's a huge difference from one side of the country to the other. My own father still farms in Cork, which is down on the south coast, and he is farming for 65 years now, and he has never, ever treated an animal for liver fluke. And he sends cattle to the abattoir every year, and he gets a green light every year. So we couldn't consider that, even though he's only 100 kilometers from me, we couldn't consider doing that in this area because we do have a liver fluke problem. So in terms of the fecal egg counts I went back to 2019 because with COVID, the last 2 years have not been typical. So 2019 was what I would consider the last, normal year, so to speak. And we did 61 fecal egg counts, which accounts for about 30% of our farmer clients. There's no doubt in the practice it's an income generator. It helps sales because, the farmer comes to me and he provides me with samples, and we look at them and we can advise him then on the appropriate treatment to use. And, that creates a trust with the farmer, and the farmer sees the value of that. I would say more often than not, we do ourselves out of sales. We actually sell less than we might have if we weren't testing. But I think that's a small price to pay for trying, at least, attempting to do the thing some way correctly. Now, the winter worming plan this is something I came up with about 10 years ago. It was the reason I did it was as much so that we had a consistent message to our farmers as anything else. So I wanted every vet, when you have 6 or 7 or 8 vets in a practice, I think it's important that each vet is giving the same message to the farmer. So what I did was, on a couple of A4 pages, I just write out a separate plan for each age group of animal, first year housing, second year housing, adult cattle, and then for each type of enterprise as well. So sucklers, dairy, and dry stock as well. I based the winter worming plan on the samples that we're taking ourselves. I base it on the type of weather we've had. So for instance, this year, here we are in November, cattle are still out. So I envisage there being a higher burden of liver fluke as this winter progresses. And I also base it on weather, liver fluke forecasts from our National Department of Agriculture. So they produce a fluke forecast for the entire country and the different areas in the country every year. So I also use that information to advise me. And so I'll give a few options of what products the farmer may use or may consider using, and that, take into consideration time of housing, and also licensing, because a lot of products aren't licensed for dairy cattle, and also then withdrawal times as well has to be very carefully monitored, particularly when you're dealing with dairy cattle. Almost by accident, it became a favorite. The farmers now look for it. They come in, they want to see the sheet up on the counter, they want to read it and familiarize themselves with what they should be doing. In all honesty, it changes very little from year to year, but it is, again, it's a source of information for our farmers. It's a trusted source, and they can see the benefits of the timings in particular, because it will give them a very clear indication of when they should use certain products. And in a nutshell, as I say, we're usually saving our customer money. They might come in for example, triclobendazole because they think it's the best, whereas they might only need albendazole, which is less than half the price. And we also save them time because, if they're using the wrong product, or even if they're using the correct product at the wrong time, they're wasting their time. So, and we're very, very clear to them on that, and that message is always given to them. So we've new legislation, Europe-wide, new legislation coming down the tracks. So from the end of January, at the end of next January, anthelmintics will be prescription only. And from our point of view, the big change will, in terms of the antibiotics, will be the routine dry cow therapy. At the moment, the vast majority of farmers will give an antibiotic infusion to every cow as she is being dried off. So there's a huge change coming for farmers. As vets, we're going to be right at the center of that. The information coming to us yet is still quite sketchy, to be honest. A lot of the shareholders have yet to fully be heard on it, and so the final decisions haven't been made just yet. As vets, there's challenging times ahead. We have to, but I think we can put ourselves front and center with our customers by offering good advice, by offering suitable testing. And I think the testing is going to change. I think we're going to use more things like serum pepsinogen and other tests that Johannes referred to yesterday when they become cost effective. And I think there's a huge role for the vet in farmer education. Like, this is a positive thing insofar as, like, farmer education, sometimes we can be a little bit shy about giving our advice to farmers, but they trust us, and when we apply the science, they'll trust us all the more. Hopefully we'll play our part in reducing resistance to, certainly in Ireland, for instance, triclabendazole in sheep. Triclabendazole resistance is a huge problem now, and we're not seeing it just yet with cattle, but it's only a matter of time if we don't change how we do things. It's our job to promote responsible usage of the products that are out there. The products that are there are pretty much what we have to work with. I don't hear of anything new coming down the tracks. So we have to use the right product at the right time. Again, as I say, it's not all about convenience. A pour on is a lot easier, but a drench might be the way to go in certain circumstances. And it also helps us with supplying our customers with a herd health approach to these things, because herd health is the future of veterinary practice. Vets of my generation struggle a little bit with herd health. I've come from a generation where it was fire brigade, sick cow, we go see her. It's changing, and we're having to change with it. And this is one very important part of it. So it certainly has given me confidence in approaching that aspect of my business as well with my farmers. With that, I'd like to thank you all for listening. I'd love to hear experiences from some of our participants today, and I'd also welcome any questions that you may have. So with that, once again, thank you. It was a pleasure speaking to you today.
Thank you very much, Kieran, for this nice presentation and view on the practice in your country in Ireland, because indeed we see now Europe, your country, we have people from all over the world in the group. So it would be interesting if they want to join and tell us how it is approached in their country. I assume it would be very different, but what I kept particularly diagnostics, treatment, communication to the farmer. How I really liked your way of communicating with the whole group at the same time. You have your same way of saying things to the farmer. And then what I also recognize is, being the fire brigade, we also have the same sensitive things in Belgium. So it's changing, but it's slowly changing. As a question, indeed, what I wrote was the resistance, but I saw Johannes had a question in the chat. Johannes, you can pop it yourself if you like, or please go.
Okay, yeah, sorry. No, I was just on the COVID situation, as you said, yes, the 2 last years were not normally. So I was wondering do you think it will be easy to go back to the normal situation and to start up monitoring approaches again?
Yeah, I think so, Johannes. I would say we have, well, certainly in Ireland, we have gone back to almost normal, or what I would consider normal 2 years ago, in that we have, we're on farms again as much as we ever were. There was a period, let's say spring 2020, autumn 2020, and spring 21, where it was definitely changed. We were only going if absolutely necessary, but now again, we are starting to have those conversations. We're starting to do our herd health visits again. Yes.
Okay, that's great to hear.
Yeah, and another, if people have remarks, please go, or questions. What I was wondering also because the resistance part is only touched later in the presentation, and then in relation to what you told us about the dictiocaulus or the lungworm treatment, but we needed to treat cows 3 times, even more sometimes. How can we within the view what we hear yesterday, what we heard, and with the good practices and the new way of thinking, selected treatment, targeted, selected, can this be appropriate? Can this be done in this, with these problems like mentioned now? If you have to treat your cows, they're coughing, they're all coughing, then I think it becomes difficult to select treatment.
Yes, I agree. I think this is the next big problem, and it's probably going to take someone a lot cleverer than me to figure out a way to solve it. I think in Ireland anyway, the reason has been, certainly, yes, climate has played a part. Also, our stocking rates have gone much, much tighter. So I mentioned how in Ireland we had a thing called Harvest 2020. And I remember speaking to my colleagues in the UK back in 2013, 2014, and telling them that Ireland was going to double its milk production before 2020. And they laughed. They said, it's not possible. But it was possible, and it was done. But now we have a situation where the farmer is suddenly being told, hold on, you're producing too much methane, you're going to have to go back again. So that might help. I think, we have reached a point now where I think some farmers will actually reduce their numbers, because labor is a huge problem on farm. And I think if we can reduce stocking rates, reduce the really tight grazing of the pasture, that will help. But there's probably more needs to be done, whether it involves mowing of pasture. I think we need to look at, step away from anthelmintics and look at the management. But as I say, that needs to be probably figured out at a national level. Yeah. Johannes, do you have anything to add there? Because this is your topic, no?
Yeah, I could act, but actually I would, because I see we only have more or less 10 minutes left. So I was wondering if we can ask to the participants if they have could comment on the problems they are experiencing in their countries, and what are their top of mind problems related to parasite control. I think
would be interesting to hear. Yeah, if someone wants to speak up, why not? I was just having another thought, because also to add what in Ireland, I don't know, with the bigger farms coming now, and we have that in Belgium in dairy, a lot of zero grazing. And I presume in the countries from which the people are in the room, I think there will always be farms with zero grazing. And in my opinion, even in a zero grazing farm, you have animals that go out once in a while. So still, I think you have to keep on testing. I don't know what the experiences are in Ireland.
Zero grazing is getting more popular because of bigger cow numbers and pasture, not having enough pasture in one block near the milking shed. So grass being brought from an outside farm or rented land. So that is becoming more common, but it's still a very small percentage of the overall.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. If I can comment, like, I agree with you that indeed when you ask to the farm, yes, but here it's zero grazing, and then when you come there suddenly and then so, but aren't that cows outside? Oh yes, but that's only just today, and tomorrow they'll be in again. So there's zero grazing and true zero grazing.
Yeah.
So it's two different things. And also, of course, like in the Netherlands where they have been this evolution and in Denmark where a lot of, maybe the majority is zero grazing, there is a reverse trend again that actually because the processors are and the clients are asking for it, the cows, so there are incentives for farmers to put their cows outside again. So there will be somewhere a balance.
Yeah. Just also for people to see that cows indeed are grazing, public opinion. Yeah, that's true.
I had a question regarding to the lungworm, Kieran, as you say, they had to be treated 2-3 times, but and then yours question on, yes, lungworm, you need to treat the whole group, but like if the second and the third treatment, do you really need to still treat the whole group, or are you mainly then targeting the coughing
ones?
Yes, that's a very good question, Johannes, and it's something I did attempt, certainly for a farmer who was going for the third time. I asked him to just pick the cows that were coughing. Usually, in fact, it was the younger cows. So first season milkers, I found, were the ones most likely to be coughing the third time around. So yes, most definitely, I was encouraging that.
Yeah.
So immunity plays indeed a big role. But then again, as you told us that the question mark, lifelong immunity. So still we see older cows having the same problems. I see now a question from Hannah. Can zero grazing have positive impact in resistance to anthelmintics?
I give that to Johannes.
That's the joker.
Positive impact, yeah. I mean, if there's zero grazing, meaning that there's no, probably a very limited parasite exposure, meaning that no treatment will be needed anymore. So you will also not have any problems with resistance anymore. So in that case, I think yes, as the normally the parasite problem will become low, there will should also not be any more problem with resistance.
Of course, we look, I think I understand, because then we look at resistance problem at farm level. And indeed, I think we have to have a helicopter view and look at resistance broader, more largely. And then I think indeed can have a good impact on, if more animals are kept inside, lower use of anthelmintics and so on, perhaps in that way. But on the other hand, then again, there's the balance between.
Yes, and I think as parasitologists or veterinarians, it's our responsibility just to find sustainable ways of doing control for grazing cattle, so we can keep the cattle on the grass. And we can support pasture-based farming, and so yeah, I think that's an important role for parasitologists. Of course, when you say all the cows are inside, maybe we go to that evolution. I don't know, but then
no, I don't think so.
All the parasites will be gone.
Yeah, but that's true. And what we experience that indeed when farmers tell us, yeah, it's zero grazing when we visit the farm and we ask the situation, and they say indeed zero grazing. But when even on those farms, we can find from time to time positive ODR in bulk milk. So we have seen it, and yeah, difficult to understand, but indeed, mowed grass or dry cows outside, heavily infested pasture at that moment. So it is possible. So we've seen it. Another perhaps more really practical thing to touch, Kieran, the bronchial lavage in a cow. How to make sure that the thing doesn't end up in the stomach. Because it was something, when I was a practitioner, we haven't learned it. We just learned it the last 10 years. So we had to make sure how to get it in the lungs, because a cow swallows everything.
Yes, except if you're. I found years ago, before we got the Agros pump. You know the Agros pump for stomach pumping cows. When you wanted to get a tube into the rumen or the stomach, that's when it would go in the lungs. So I have this very simple way. I keep the cow's head up as high as possible, and it generally will go into the trachea, and it usually works that way. So that's keep her head up as high as you possibly can. Yeah.
What we often try is to take the tongue, so they can't swallow.
Yes, that's a good one.
Just another trick.
Yeah.
And in how many cases, when you are like convinced that it's lungworm, can you also show the worms?
I would say 100%.
Okay.
It is very. We have a lot of. By the time you decide to do a BAL, you are pretty sure, and it always it never lets me down.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, please go. Someone wants to talk.
So for this lavage, you use normal saline, or as far as I understood?
Yes, we use normal saline from a drip bag.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how many mils?
About 150. Yeah.
Just coming back to the topic of zero grazing. So I work as veterinarian in Sudan. So at that time, what I remember when I was practicing in the practice, that the farmer always complaining about weight loss. And at that time, we don't have in Sudan this grazing system. We don't have pastures. That the majority of the farmers, they keep their animal inside, and they feed it them with this, with either hay or either a combination of some prepared additives. But still, I see that the herd is suffering from this internal parasite, and I'm just wondering from where they can get the infection.
Yeah.
Question 4.
Do you have like, do you know which kind of parasite?
Unfortunately not. They didn't make any tests for that, but just from the clinical science or symptoms, when you see that the animal just losing weight dramatically, then yeah.
I guess the first thing to do would be some kind of fecal examination, trying to find out which kind of parasites. And I don't know, like the bottom or the floor system of the cows. But yes, if they're like on ground, there can still be some development of the eggs, even if there's no grass. But if they're really not on a concrete floor, but on ground, like outdoor, there can still be some development.
These are Holstein dairy cows in Sudan, or what are they breeding?
Yes, Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
I think the first thing to do is to establish what the
Yes.
parasite is and work from there.
And accompanied with diarrhea sometimes.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
With the diarrhea.
Yeah, indeed. But also good to hear how it is approached in a very different climate, because indeed, what I understood also in Ireland, the climate is very much important.
Yeah.
And even in a small country, small between brackets, like Ireland then, because also Belgium isn't that big, one side of the country very much different then. And also we saw it and we saw it years ago also, different regions where we saw indeed fluke, but Johannes can tell us much more about that one. Regions that are more sensitive to be positive for fluke. We saw it in the slaughterhouse, that the cows that were positive, or where we had to reject livers, that they came sometimes from the same regions. And we saw it in a study earlier on where we took some, I think it was a study from Benama, Johannes, where she took some samples and she looked at the positive rate of ODR samples and antibody samples in blood. And it came that also in Belgium, we had some regions where you have much more liver fluke than in other regions. And so there, and then of course in the countries I see here, they're very much different climates. So
yes, for liver fluke, well, first it's a climate. So like Kieran says, for instance, the west compared to the east of Ireland. But even within the same climate zone, and even within, so let's say in Belgium we have low risk areas, high risk areas, but even within those areas, if you go to the high risk areas, there's still some farms negative, and even if they're not treating. And also in the low risk areas, there's still some farm positive. So it really comes down in that case on, okay, is the intermediate host, so are the snails, do they have spots there to survive? Even if the climate is the same, it's wet enough on both conditions, but depending on maybe some patchy areas of the soil or drainage, etc., are the snails able to live there, or is there a snail population? Maybe there are farms that you say here there's enough habitats where the snails could live, but we can't find any. We don't know why there are not any, but there seem to be no. So so it can be very, very different from farm to farm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I don't see any other questions. We still have some minutes. If we can go to 15:15 if we want to, if we have some questions. Otherwise, we can give you some minutes back. If there are some remarks, please shoot.
I had another question, but I don't want to take other people's opportunity.
Yeah, but if no one is,
I think maybe
Johannes, you still can.
Dr. Georg, did you have a question? You were appearing. George, Papa, Giorgio? No. No, my question was on the in the presentation of Kieran. I very much liked the slide on the winter warming plan. Was very good, I think. I was wondering, are farmers prepared to pay for such a plan? Or
yeah, well, in our case, it's a free service. It's just a sheet of paper that's up, or a number of sheets of paper stapled together up on the counter as they come in. Maybe some of my colleagues might think it's foolish to give information away like that for free, but it's just, I view it as another part of the service that we provide.
yes, okay.
It's client binding also. Give good consultation, good advice.
The total package.
Yeah, indeed. No other remarks, no other questions?
No.
Okay, then we can give you back some minutes. I will stop the recording.